So Pegasus, as you know, is a tool developed by the NSO group in Israel, and it's spyware that just turns your phone into a surveillance tool, so they can ostensibly get access to everything that's on your phone, which then would include any chats that are in your encrypted messaging apps as well. And also they can take over your camera and your microphone. So it's not only getting all of your past data, but also can turn into like an active surveillance tool.
Hi, Zelly. Welcome. It's a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you for taking the time to exchange. Could you tell us a bit about yourself, your life path, and the work of your organization?
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here. So I work at the Propaganda Research Lab, which is housed within the Center for Media Engagement at the University of Texas at Austin. I'm a PhD candidate at UT and primarily a researcher at the Propaganda Research Lab. And broadly, the center focuses on fostering a healthy media ecosystem. So we have researchers working on this in really diverse areas, from journalism and media ethics to science communication. But at the Propaganda Research Lab, which is run by Dr. Sam Woolley, Dr. Inga Trautig, and Dr. Joe Lakito, we really focus on this in the context of social media and political propaganda. So we have several lines of inquiry, but we especially focused on the encrypted messaging apps for the spread of disinformation and political propaganda, the use of political influencers to spread disinformation, and other forms of election interference. So in the past, we've also looked at the use of geolocation to spread propaganda, for instance.
One of your main area of focus is about EMA. Could you explain what it is and why is it so important for political activism or journalism?
Yes, for sure. So yeah, I often, not you, but I often lose people when I say encrypted messaging app, but it's effectively just a chat app like WhatsApp or Signal. The important piece though is that it's encrypted, and that means that no one can see your messages other than you and the person or people you send the message to. And that's what makes these different from other messaging services. A lot of apps do employ some level of encryption, but end-to-end encryption is the only one that ensures that no one, even the corporation or the government, no one can see into your messages. So WhatsApp and Signal, for example, use end-to-end encryption by default, whereas with other apps like Facebook Messenger, Instagram Direct, Telegram, you have to turn it on or use a specific type of chat. So that's like something to watch out for. We could talk about that more later. And then iMessage is also a bit tricky. You can end-to-end encrypt your messages, but you have to turn off cloud backups for messages, and whoever you're chatting with also needs to have an iPhone and have their cloud backups turned off. So there's like a lot of details once you get in the weeds with encrypted messaging apps, but they're really critical for political communication right now because they are used by so many people throughout the world. WhatsApp has over 2 billion users. WeChat, which is really popular in China, has 1.3 billion. And we found that EMAs are a double-edged sword. They're really crucial for activists and journalists who are trying to communicate, especially under an authoritarian regime. But they can also be used by governments, by authoritarian governments, by lone wolf propagandists to spread disinformation and political propaganda. And we've seen this in ways that can actually bolster the authoritarian regime. So we kind of have to consider both sides of that coin when we're talking about EMA.
Okay, and what's the cases that you've been studying about EMA? Could you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, definitely. So we have looked at the use of EMAs for all kinds of political communication all around the globe. One project that just came out in First Monday, which is an academic publication, but it's open access, so anyone can read it, which is great, was looking at the use of EMAs in Southeast Asia as both tools of democratic activism and tools of authoritarian propaganda. So for instance, we spoke to a propagandist who works in Indonesia, who is just a paid political propagandist. He is hired by political candidates to spread misinformation, disinformation about the other candidates, and to increase and really manufacture support for the candidate that he works for. And, you know, he told us, like, this is just a job. Like, this is just a normal job here. It's not the same as for y'all in the States, where this is like, oh, it's so scary. Like, it's just a job. It is illegal, but it's a job. And of course, that's not to say, like, we have people doing that here in the States too, and our work has seen those as well. But then on the flip side, you know, we also spoke to people in Myanmar for that same project who were saying, like, this is literally the only way we can get real information out is, you know, we coordinate on Signal, we coordinate online protests, we coordinate offline protests. And if we didn't have something like Signal or Telegram, we would be constantly at risk, because anytime they go outside of the house, someone from the state will be, you know, taking their phone or seizing their property, and then they would immediately be at risk. But because they use, say, like disappearing messages or something on Signal, they're much safer. So yeah, it's tricky, because it's both. You know, it's hard to say one way or the other if EMAs are good or bad.
Sure. And on I wonder, on an app like WhatsApp, is there some moderation that is being enforced by a company like Meta? Is it possible for them to, like, censor some misinformation or other stuff like that, or is it completely free?
Yeah, so that's a really excellent question, and it's different for different EMAs. So, like, Signal doesn't do this, but WhatsApp, for instance, has a reporting feature where if you report a message, then the WhatsApp moderators can see like 5 contextual messages around it, which is a reason that people consider it to be less secure, but also a reason, you know, one step they're trying to take to prevent the spread of misinformation. And that is that's just one of the steps they've taken. So they've also done things like limiting message forwarding and reducing the size of groups in an attempt to try to reduce the spread of misinformation. Those have had sort of mixed success. Like the evidence has been kind of inconclusive in social science if that's super helpful in reducing the spread of misinformation, because unfortunately, like, we need those kinds of top-down approaches, but they don't really get at the real root of why people believe in misinformation, which is often, you know, ideological. It's more about collective identity than it is always about just believing something that's not true. And so those approaches aren't really community-centered and don't do very much to address that issue.
Juste un petit message pour rappeler que la Fabrique sociale est une chaîne indépendante et qu'elle ne peut vivre que grâce à votre soutien. Donc, si vous appréciez le contenu, n'hésitez pas à liker la vidéo, à la commenter, à la partager au plus grand nombre et même à faire un don sur Tipeee. Même les plus petits gestes comptent. Le lien est dans les notes. Bonne écoute.
I was wondering how effective can be AI in content moderation on social media, because I've been studying this through the Facebook files, which was I think 2 years ago, something like that. And yeah, I think one of the articles were saying that the AI used by Meta was pretty much ineffective in spotting hateful content, so that AI moderation wasn't really working. What's your opinion about that? Do you have some elements that can confirm it? Or
our research at the lab, we haven't tested the impact or effectiveness of AI in that, but I would say, you know, I've heard mixed results, and I would also, you know, generative AI is just tricky, right? Like, I think it's really, everyone is panicking right now. It's like become the new moral panic, and I think this gets to, you know, something that is a bigger issue within the literature, which is just that a lot of these tools really center a very particular type of consumer who is an American usually, or Western user who's also speaks English. And so that, I think, is challenging when we think about tools like AI, they're trained by the data that we give them or that they have available, right? And that data is often biased. So as you point out, like hateful content, a lot of the data online that trains AI is really terrible, right? Like it's really, you know, bigoted, hateful content. And that's the kind of thing that we saw like in the classic example of Microsoft's Tay chatbot. Like she was supposed to be this good, benevolent force. And then unfortunately, people were able to very quickly train her to just like put out a lot of really hateful, bigoted content. And so I would say that's what's more concerning to me about using AI is that it's based on data that's not necessarily it's not necessarily full of true information that we want to proliferate, I would say.
Yeah, sure. And I wonder, does the language barrier increases inequalities in the fight for propaganda? Because we have a social media like Facebook, which kind of have the same rules for like 3 billion people in a sense. And I'm wondering how much of an impact it has on the misinformation that can spread in foreign countries.
Yeah, I definitely think it has a huge impact because unfortunately, most of the tools that we have are just better at detecting misinformation in English than they are in other languages. So, you know, just like you were saying, AI is a useful tool, probably more useful for detecting misinformation in English than in other languages. And that is really true across the board with these top-down approaches to content moderation. And it means that a lot of things get missed when they are in other languages, or even like, you know, different cultural contexts. Like that's a real concern too, is we're not necessarily able to, I mean, I'm not doing this, but the platforms aren't necessarily able to apply the same tools that they use in the US context in Myanmar, for example. And it's concerning that we don't have more specific teams and larger teams to be able to address each community's needs in order to fight misinformation. And then in our work too at the lab, we've often seen that unfortunately diaspora communities are real targets for propagandists, for bad actors to spread misinformation too. And then it's compounded when, say, maybe they're speaking in another language, and that also goes undetected.
Okay, and I wonder, did you study a bit the spread of misinformation in Myanmar, or yeah? Could you give us a bit more of a context for this case?
Yeah, for sure. Basically, what we do qualitative interviews. So we spoke with democratic activists, journalists, and fact checkers in Myanmar. You know, no surprise, like we didn't get to speak with anyone in the military regime because that of course makes sense. But yeah, basically, you know, what we learned is that after the military took over and you know, overturned the democratic election, a lot of misinformation started flowing around. Likely, we can't prove it, but very likely a lot of disinformation, political propaganda straight from just the regime started coming out. And that was, you know, very prevalent on Facebook, very prevalent on Telegram. You know, interestingly though, a lot of people told us it's very easy to spot. They were like, this is clearly just regime propaganda and we see it and we understand it. But of course, you know, that could have been a feature of the people that we were speaking to, who are often, you know, pretty informed about what's going on. And I think, you know, that's the hardest thing too, that they were saying is that the technological tools that they have, Facebook, Telegram, Twitter, you know, now X, were really the only way that they could get real information back out to other countries. And so again, you know, technology is such a double-edged sword. Like it is the space where misinformation was spreading. It is also the only way that they could get real news and send out real news. Because, you know, once the military just starts like destroying a free press, like what else are you going to do? So that's generally what we learned. But yeah, any specific questions about Myanmar too? Any other, you know, specific questions? I'm happy to dive into that more.
Yeah, sure. Do you have maybe other examples in mind of foreign countries where there was a case of a big spread of misinformation that maybe destabilized a society apart from Myanmar? Sorry.
Yeah, we just actually, Inga Trautig and Sam Woolley and I just came out with a paper about this, where basically we looked at I think 11 country case studies was maybe where we landed. It's hard to remember exactly how many, but all across the globe. And they were instances where we found that, they were instances where there was already some democratic backsliding happening. And then we found that EMAs mostly facilitated that rather than facilitated, democracy. And so specifically, I would say, let's see, what about through the spread of misinformation? I mean, of course, not like just in general by them existing. In Egypt, I would say that was one that was really tough because people could probably have used EMAs to safely communicate, but they were so afraid of mass surveillance, which is tricky because it is true, but also then it informed their beliefs in some misinformation, like the idea that EMAs weren't safe. So people would maybe not trust EMAs because they would think, okay, we're being completely surveilled. Probably they could have used EMAs to communicate. And it's these kind of beliefs that are, misinformative, but grounded in some truth that end up really holding people down from doing some kind of activism, which of course is still happening in Egypt. People are activists in Egypt, but because there's a grain of truth there. So it's really hard to say, hey, this is or isn't true. But it's also a tool, of an authoritarian government to convince people there's nowhere safe, there's nowhere you can communicate, and we have eyes on you all of the time. So that's sort of like a bigger disinformation campaign, like just you're under mass surveillance. It's true, but it's also something that they could probably subvert in some ways.
Yeah, sure. About mass surveillance, the Snowden case went public in 2013, was 10 years ago. Time flies. Time flies. It exposed how citizens of democratic countries were spied on by the American government. In your opinion, did it have an impact on how the public relates to privacy? Or was it pretty useless? What's your take on that?
It's an excellent question. I think it's hard to answer as an academic who works on privacy. I'm like, my gut reaction is like, yes, obviously, it's all that anyone talks about. But, honestly, I mean, we look at the last 10 years, and I don't know that I broadly see any big data privacy changes other than in the wrong direction. I think, there are companies are moving towards end-to-end encryption, which is great. Facebook Messenger and Instagram Direct are supposed to become default end-to-end encrypted at some point. And so that would be good. iMessage and Apple, writ large have been implementing some security measures. But I think broadly, people don't take advantage of them until they feel at risk. So this does actually get to some of my other research, which is on anti-abortion activists and pro-choice activists in the States. And, anti-abortion activists are like not concerned about their privacy in my research, mostly at all. There are a couple that have been engaging in criminal activity who are now like, okay, I need to take some steps. But for most of them, they know that they're not really at legal risk. And so they're not concerned about what data they're putting out there. Pro-choice activists told us that, now they're very concerned about what data they're putting out there, but they weren't before. And you see this too in the case of like this sort of mass panic about like, let's all delete our period trackers, let's all delete all of our online data about our health when Roe v. Wade was overturned in the States and federal protection for abortion ended. Everyone panicked, but that's kind of died off. And I think that's sort of what happens is, of course it was huge when the Snowden revelations came out. And now, I mean, we're pretty much all, doing the same kinds of data data collection and data sharing that we did before. So I don't know. I think it was a pivotal moment, but I don't know if it had a lasting impact, unfortunately.
Yeah. I agree. Like, in my opinion, privacy seems like a value that is kind of outdated sometimes. Yeah, because I feel like we're so surrounded by cameras that we get used to it a bit. Yeah, I feel like it's so practical to give up our data to have like just personalized services and all that. Yeah, we just don't think about it anymore. That's like when I see the French in the streets on their phones and how they use technology. I feel like, or especially young people, they don't really care about that. That's my take on that. There was a huge media investigation that was made public about 2 years ago that was named Project Pegasus. Could you maybe introduce us to this case?
Absolutely, and yeah, I agree. It's really critical, and also something that when we're talking about EMAs and secure messaging, we should definitely make sure to highlight, or I should make sure to highlight too. So Pegasus, as you know, is a tool developed by the NSO group in Israel, and it's spyware that just turns your phone into a surveillance tool, so they can ostensibly get access to everything that's on your phone, which then would include any chats that are in your encrypted messaging apps as well. And also they can take over your camera and your microphone. So it's not only getting all of your past data, but also can turn into like an active surveillance tool. And the Pegasus project came out, and it's a collective of journalists who showed all of these numbers that were attached to all these people being surveilled, like 50,000 phone numbers. Many of them were not, terrorists or criminals or whoever. They were, regular people. They were journalists. They were human rights activists. They were people who were working for democracy. And Israel and the NSO group claim that they only sell Pegasus to governments in order to prevent terrorism, prevent criminal activity. But then, of course, what we ended up seeing is that actually this is probably being used to silence political dissidents, to track political dissidents, and to track activists. So, of course, that's, just like terrifying. But I think another important thing to note about it is that it is a real black box. We don't know who their clients are. We don't exactly know what it's being used for, other than probably surveillance that we should not be conducting, is my general guess. And it's very concerning, especially from an encrypted messaging app's perspective. Like, you can use Signal or WhatsApp all you want, but it protects your messages in transit, which is very important, but it doesn't protect your messages if someone gets access to your device. Oh, sorry about that. Either through spyware or just picking up your device.
Yeah, and do you know what happened when this case went public? Do you know if there was some concrete measures taken to I don't know, sanction this group, or what happened?
Pegasus is still accessible and still used and still sold. So I don't think that as far as I know, I could be wrong, but it was just likely used against Khashoggi. So I think it's still working as normal. I should double check. I could be wrong, but I think that unfortunately there are a lot of situations across the globe where people are getting away with silencing the free press, silencing activists, and I don't know, other countries that maybe could do something about it are not necessarily stepping in. So that's I think that's a global systemic concern, and not even just a Pegasus concern, but it is related.
Yeah, sure. Okay, thanks. Can we talk about bots? It was a big subject of controversy last year when I remember Elon Musk was in the process to buy Twitter, and the bots subject came up. I wonder how predominant bots are online, and is there some actions, in your opinion, that we could take to mitigate their proliferation, or do we just have to like get used to it and like trying to spot them, or I don't know?
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question, and I've actually just been reading up, sort of doing some more reading about bots just recently for this this other thing that I'm working on, and unfortunately, yeah, we don't have that many solutions, but I'll get to that after we talk about what they are. So yeah, so bots, according to Statista, bad faith bots, so not just like regular automated scripts that are good bots that or neutral bots that are just doing things like they're putting out the news for a reputable news organization or whatever. Bad faith bots apparently account for 30% of online traffic. So that's kind of a lot. And in the disinformation sphere, we're of course interested in these bots that are used to manipulate public opinion, bots that are spreading propaganda, and we know that people use them for these purposes, of course. They can be really instrumental in disinformation campaigns. I would say bots are one of those things that are sort of a moral panic, like generative AI, where there is real reason to be concerned. They are used in disinformation campaigns. They are used by state actors. They're used, sort of indirectly by state actors, like people are hired to spread propaganda. They're definitely prevalent and they exist. But at the same time, it's the people, not the tools, that are causing this problem, that are spreading this propaganda. It's the people who are designing the bots more than it is, the bot itself. And so it is kind of maybe something that we should reframe and think about, like how to stop the propagandists rather than just trying to stop bots. Because, as you point out, what happens is it's really hard to track bots individually, like just as a regular person who's online. The research has shown that people are really bad at telling what's a bot and what's not a bot. So that's a good thing to try to do. We should all try to do it, but it's not necessarily the best way. I would say, at least in the US, we really need some policy regulations surrounding bots. We need some other campaign finance reform, but it's really hard to motivate tech companies to do anything because it could hurt their bottom line, to say, oh, we have this many bots on the platform. It's going to discourage, real users from joining. And also, like, that's still traffic, that's still engagement. So it is a really challenging thing to regulate, and they are spreading massive amounts of propaganda. And in the upcoming 2024 elections, we'll see bots are probably going to be used, I would bet.
Yeah, I guess. And do you feel like politicians in the US are taking the problem seriously enough? Is there a kind of growing concern for online propaganda, since the many cases you have with Cambridge Analytica, with the Facebook files? Do you feel like the subject is getting taken seriously?
I think they are. I think across the board they are serious about it and concerned about it, but I think that they are not able to agree on how to deal with it, and that's our main issue. I would say is that everybody agrees that it's a problem, but no one is saying, okay, this is the best solution, and we can all rally together and agree on that. And I mean, and they're really battling each other as far as as I think as you've pointed out, like there's a debate over sort of censorship or over if we want free speech, and that's a black and white way to put it, but it is very challenging to find some middle ground there.
Yeah, I can only guess. And in your opinion, what are the next frontiers of propaganda? What worries you the most for the future years. We talked about generative AI, bots. Is there something you have in mind that really worries you?
Yeah, I mean, this is a really great question, and I think it's something that we're all trying to figure out right now in the disinformation sphere is what's next. And, you know, I was just part of a meeting where we were all talking about, okay, how are we going to get ahead of the 2024 election? How are we going to do counter disinformation research that is proactive and not reactive? And it's just really hard to say because propagandists are also very good at adapting to, you know, changing regulations, changing policy. As you say, you know, everyone is concerned about generative AI. Of course, I think that that's just, it's being really talked about right now. Many of the researchers I know think it might be overhyped, but we're just going to have to see in the election, you know, and there's concerns surrounding, you know, not necessarily what we might immediately think of, which is someone putting into ChatGPT, like, I need 100 fake messages or whatever. Maybe that isn't how it's going to be used. Instead, it's going to be used to, you know, to facilitate disenfranchisement of people. It's going to be used in order to manipulate data or do redlining, like that. Those are potentially some concerns that might ultimately lead to some kind of election interference, but not in a way that's as easy to track as like, here's a propagandist. And then, I mean, you know, I think any emerging technology is important to watch. So of course, I'm going to say encrypted messaging apps are important to watch, but also, you know, the metaverse is up and coming, and all the different kinds of VR are up and coming. So we might think about those things as next steps. And ultimately, you know, I think, unfortunately, as we get closer and closer, at least in the US, as we get closer and closer to the election, I'll probably have a better answer. And I don't know if that's good or bad, but I'm sure I will.
Yeah, and so difficult question, but what's, in your opinion, what's the most important actions that we should take in order to have a more healthy ecosystem? Is there some things that comes to your mind?
Yeah, I think, you know, as I sort of briefly touched on earlier, I really would say we need more community-centered approaches to fighting misinformation. So, like, to give a more concrete example, a lot of people are already doing their own fact-checking. A lot of the activists we spoke to in Myanmar, for instance, were already doing their own community fact-checking. And instead of trying to come in and say, like, okay, we're going to, you know, do a top-down, maybe AI approach to fact-checking information that maybe doesn't use a great tool for detecting Burmese or a different language, and also maybe doesn't use any cultural context. Instead, we can fund and support the people who are already doing this work, and that might look like supporting diaspora communities in the US or supporting people in other countries. So that is one suggestion that I have. I mean, more for tech companies, and I don't know if they're going to take it, but and then also, you know, as researchers, we really need access to aggregated social media data, and we often don't have that. And if we want to rein in the problem, we really need more insight, more visibility, and platforms are still black boxes in a lot of ways, most of them. So that's a big challenge. I mean, especially with everything going on with X and everything changing, like that is a challenge for us. And then, I mean, we've both talked about how this is maybe a lost cause at this point, but I do think a more comprehensive data privacy law, at least in the US, would be helpful. The GDPR isn't perfect, and there are a lot of good and bad policy regulation technology regulation around Europe and the States and everywhere. I think it's kind of a mixed bag, but the mass data collection that really facilitates very intense hyper-targeting here, that could be helped by having a better data privacy law. Unfortunately, none of those are individual solutions. They're tech solutions and policy solutions, but there are some things we can do individually, probably.
Zelly, it was a pleasure. It was fascinating, really interesting. Thank you very much. Yeah, let's keep in touch, and maybe we'll make a second episode in a few months, just before the US elections.
I'm sure I will have some interesting insights. I hope they're not too scary, but we'll see. It was really wonderful to be here. Thank you so much for having me and chatting.